They told you that time heals everything. But no one ever told you what truly heals. Silence. Not that passive, fragile silence, filled with swallowed pain, but strategic silence, the one that emerges when you choose not to react, not to beg, not to explain, and still cause a devastating impact. Have you noticed how the one who betrays you always expects the same thing? They expect you to cry, to chase, to send that one last message saying you miss them. They expect you to react because that's the emotional formula that protects them from guilt. But when you do the opposite, when you simply disappear, something breaks. The truth is, no one is prepared to be ignored by someone who used to care. No one knows how to deal with the absence of someone who was always there. When you respond with emotional absence, silence stops being emptiness. It becomes a brutal mirror. And in that mirror, the one who betrayed you sees exactly what they tried to avoid, their own mistake. Stoicism teaches us that real emotional power lies in not reacting on impulse, in using silence as a tool for rebuilding, not escape. And that's exactly what you're going to learn here. How to turn silence into a response, coldness into strength, and absence into victory. This video is a direct human and strategic guide for anyone who has been betrayed, discarded, or ignored, and is tired of wasting energy trying to figure out what went wrong. The answer lies in your selective presence and your emotional control. When you learn how to use silence wisely, even those who betrayed you start to question what they lost. You'll realize that the cruelest form of revenge isn't revenge, it's peace. That the deepest wound in those who used you isn't your scream, but your calm indifference. Because it offers no opening, no closure, just leaves them lost inside their own conscience. If everything you've said so far hasn't worked, if no one listened, if no one changed, maybe it's time to stop talking and let silence say what no word could. It's in that space, between what you choose not to say and what the other person needs to hear, that the psychological game finally ends and you don't need to play anymore. There is a kind of silence that cuts deeper than any word. But it's not the cold silence of someone too scared to speak, nor the passive silence of someone paralyzed by fear or insecurity. It's a different silence, a mature, intentional one, a clean, sharp cut. Silence as power. Most people scream when they're hurt. They want to explain themselves, to be understood, to defend their position. And that's exactly why they lose, because they place themselves in the middle of an emotional battlefield that leads nowhere. But those who choose conscious silence choose not to fight where there's no dignity left. Make no mistake, this choice isn't easy. Staying silent when everything inside you wants to speak takes a kind of strength few people know. It's the kind of strength that doesn't show, that earns no applause, that has no stage, but it's the strength that transforms. That's where true Stoicism begins. Strategic silence isn't cowardice, it's clarity. It's knowing that sometimes the best response isn't to push back, it's to withdraw your presence, and that hurts, because the one who expected a fight is met with emptiness. And emptiness, where that echoes. It stays in their mind, bruises their ego, dismantles any defense. While they wait for your attack, you don't show up. While they expect your long text, you send nothing. When they think they'll win the argument, you vanish. That's the power of strategic absence. It doesn't shout, it doesn't bleed, but it leaves a mark no one forgets. There's a brutal difference between passive silence and mature silence. The first makes you a victim. The second puts you in control. The first waits. The second acts. When you choose silence as strategy, you're not being weak. You're returning the responsibility. You're saying without words, deal with what you caused. That kind of silence demands self-control. It demands that you let go of the illusion that you need to win an argument to be validated. You don't need to prove your worth in any emotional battle. Real worth is proven in what you don't say, in the fights you don't enter, in the scenes you refuse to make. Maybe you've never tried this before. Maybe you always felt like you needed to get in the last word. But what if for the first time you simply didn't respond? What if this time silence became the beginning of your emotional freedom? What if that silence was the cut that sets you free? Think of all the times you argued just hoping for recognition. Now think of how often that worked. Rarely, right? Because confrontation feeds the game, but silence ends it. And those who fall silent with awareness don't step back out of weakness. They step back out of wisdom. And wisdom, my friend, is a rare weapon. This is the point that separates those who merely react from those who truly master their emotions. Those who practice Stoicism know that not everything needs to be resolved on the surface. Sometimes what really needs to happen is to be left in silence so it dissolves on its own without the weight of your presence. Strategic absence is like an emotional blade. It doesn't bleed on the outside, but it cuts deep inside. And the more the other person tries to understand your silence, the more they're confronted with their own mistake. That's when silence becomes a mirror. And the one who hurt you finally sees themselves as they never wanted to. If this message struck a chord with you, it's because you've already felt the power of silence firsthand. And if you're ready to go deeper into this kind of emotional self-control, I invite you to subscribe to the channel now. Here you'll learn how to turn absence into power, silence into response, and presence into something truly strategic. Because sometimes the first cut is silence, but the next step is even deeper. There's a discomfort no one talks about, yet nearly everyone has felt it. That strange emptiness that shows up when someone stops replying, stops caring, stops trying. At first it seems like a misunderstanding, but over time it becomes clear. You're being ignored, and it hurts. It's not like an argument, which explodes and then fades. Silence is different. It doesn't warn you. It just arrives. And at first, you try to rationalize, maybe she's busy, maybe he lost signal. But deep down, the truth is already starting to sting. The other person chose not to respond. And what does that create? A mirror, an involuntary reflection of everything you said, did, or left undone. You start replaying old conversations, looking for clues, decoding phrases. A simple okay becomes a riddle. An emoji turns into a sentence. Because silence has that power, it triggers emotional paranoia. This discomfort is deeply psychological, because humans fear not being seen, and silence is the total denial of that gaze. When you speak to someone and they choose not to reply, they're saying, without words, you're no longer a priority. And that shakes anyone. This is where silence shows its strength. It doesn't need to scream to be heard. It imposes itself through absence, through doubt, through lack, and the brain, desperate for answers, creates 1,000 narratives. Every second without a reply becomes fuel for anxiety. Every minute without a sign becomes a reminder of rejection. But the most interesting thing is that silence doesn't always come from a bad place. Many times it's a boundary, a silent enough, an internal decision to stop engaging where there is no reciprocity. And even so, it hurts. Because the other person is forced to face what they did, or failed to do. That emptiness isn't just the absence of sound, it's the absence of meaning. It's when the other person realizes that their presence no longer has the same effect, that you're no longer moved by their excuses, that you're no longer there emotionally available. And that creates a void, an uncomfortable emotional echo. Ever seen someone try to mask the feeling of being ignored? They make jokes, send a "hey stranger," try to provoke with sarcasm. But underneath it all is unresolved pain, the pain of no longer being relevant. And silence forces that person to face it, with no way out. In many cases, silence stings more than a direct answer, because a reply, even a harsh one, brings closure. Silence, however, leaves everything open. It breeds interpretation. It makes the other doubt their own perception. Did I do something wrong? That question turns into a hammer in the mind. And that's when silence stops being just absence. It becomes provocation. It invites reflection, forces reconsideration, and triggers confrontation. Even unintentionally, it becomes an emotional trigger, a subtle yet powerful reminder that something has changed. And that change might be irreversible. That's why silence is feared, because it exposes. It exposes what the other doesn't want to see. It reveals emotional dependency, fear of rejection, neediness disguised as pride. And the one who's ignored, even for a moment, spirals inward, and often doesn't know how to get out. This is the cruelest kind of silent impact. You did nothing, you just withdrew, and still you caused an earthquake. Because the ones who depend on your presence feel your absence as loss. But those who never valued you feel your absence as guilt, and that guilt is unbearable. Silence is the mirror no word could ever be. It reflects, with brutal honesty, everything that was hidden beneath appearances. And once the mirror is in place and there's no way to unsee it, manipulation only works as long as you react. As long as you're still justifying yourself, still getting irritated, still trying to explain better. The manipulator feeds on your imbalance, on your need to be understood. But the day you stop reacting, something shifts, the game turns, and they lose control. That's the moment the manipulator realizes they've lost their main emotional lever, your predictability. Before, a sarcastic comment, a subtle jab, a dismissive, "You're overreacting," and you'd explode. Now everything they throw at you falls into emptiness, and that shakes them completely. Unpredictability is a nightmare for those who need control. As long as you follow the same emotional script, you're easy to manipulate. They know exactly which buttons to push. But when you break the pattern and respond with silence, with indifference, with calm presence, they unravel. Power changes hands, and tension rises, because now the manipulator doesn't know what to expect. They used to pull the strings and watch you dance, but now they pull you and you don't move, you don't react, you don't give in. And it's in that strategic no and that deliberate void that your strength is revealed. You don't need to confront, just don't follow the script. If he expects you to lash out, give him a calm look. If she expects your jealousy, offer silence. If they want you to chase, stay still. Predictability is the soul of manipulation. Breaking it is the start of your freedom. Manipulative people build emotional patterns through repetition. They test, they observe, they log reactions. If I act like this, he'll feel guilty. If I disappear, she'll come back. But when those patterns stop working, their whole structure begins to collapse. Because without control, there's no game. Lack of reaction is not coldness, it's strategy. It's a sophisticated answer that says, you no longer have access to what affects me. And that disarms. Because the manipulator doesn't want truth, they want advantage. And when they lose the advantage, they also lose the act. You can't dominate someone who refuses to play the game. If before you begged for attention, now you disappear. If before you tried to solve everything with dialogue, now you just observe. And that new posture, silent and firm, shakes the ego of someone who thought they had you figured out. Has this happened to you? Someone who always seemed to know how to push your buttons, and suddenly they can't. That's the breaking point. It's when you stop being an emotional puppet and become something they never expected, an enigma. And enigmas confuse. They throw people off course. Being unpredictable doesn't mean being inconsistent. It means being lucid enough not to repeat yourself. Knowing that giving the same reaction every time is handing over the keys to your emotional control. And when you change the pace, shift the tone, break the cycle, they get lost. And through that you find yourself. The manipulator panics when they realize their effect on you is gone. Because they don't want you happy or even miserable. They want you vulnerable, they want you dependent on their validation, constantly reacting, constantly explaining. But when you choose silence, that you deny them all of that. Lack of reaction becomes the new language of your strength. A quiet, elegant, unwavering force. One that doesn't need to prove itself. Just be. And when you begin to move that way, unpredictable, contained, strategic, you dismantle every attempt at control. This is the art of emotional control in Stoicism. It's not about not feeling, it's about not handing over. And the less you give, the more you observe. And the more you observe, the more clearly you see who's really on the other side. At that point, silence is already enough. Few things are as unsettling as expecting a reaction and receiving nothing. It's in that empty space that silence becomes a language of its own. Not omission, not weakness, but a response. One without noise, yet powerful enough to speak straight to the nervous system of whoever tried to control you. The human brain hates uncertainty. Neuroscientists call it ambiguity aversion. When someone provokes you expecting rage and receives silence instead, that ambiguity creates internal tension. The brain starts searching for meaning, and the less it finds, the more restless it becomes. It's in that emotional void where control falls apart. because absence breaks the circuit. Where there used to be predictability, shouting triggers shouting, silence triggers guilt, there is now a blind spot. The pattern breaks, and the one who tried to control the dynamic loses their footing. Absence becomes a reversed mirror. It no longer shows the other what they want to see. It shows what they try to avoid, their own powerlessness. Because control only works when there's a response, and silence by nature offers no fuel. Imagine a dance. Emotional manipulation works the same way. One leads, the other follows. But when you stop, when you step back, the other stumbles. Because choreography only works when both bodies are in sync. Silence breaks the rhythm. It ends the music. This effect isn't just symbolic, it's neurological. Studies show that the brain processes silence as a threat pause, a space where no resolution appears. This triggers activation of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, putting the other person into a state of alert. And in that alertness, control slips. Because now the manipulator starts reacting to you, trying to decode you, searching for explanations. Meanwhile, you remain silent, not out of pride, but out of strategy. Because sometimes absence says what 1,000 words never could. Have you ever noticed how someone suddenly starts acting differently just because you went quiet? It messes with their emotions. It creates insecurity. It opens the door to regret. Because silence forces the other to fill in the blanks with their own projections. And that's when they start wondering if they cross the line. Absence breaks cycles, especially the toxic ones. The ones where you always come back to talk, always give in, always try to fix things. But when you don't show up, don't reply, don't explain, the game ends, and the other is forced to face themselves without an audience. This is Stoicism in action. Not running from emotions, but deciding what's worth your energy. And once you realize that silence is a mature emotional response, everything changes. You no longer react, you choose. And that choice gives you your power back. Maybe this is the most evolved language of pain. Not screaming, but silence, not revenge, but vanishing. And the moment your absence becomes heavier than your presence, you've finally understood the value of what you offer. There's a kind of revenge that doesn't come from anger, but from evolution. It's not yelling, not giving back what they gave you. It's simply not being there anymore. When someone comes back and realizes you're no longer in the same place, not physically, not emotionally, that hurts more than any answer. Because their return always comes with a silent assumption that you're still the same, that you still feel the same, that you'll smile when you see their name on your screen, that you'll want to talk, to clear things up, to forgive. But then comes the shock, because you've changed. And that shatters everything. You're no longer where they left you, not because you became cold or bitter, but because you grew. You stopped orbiting around someone who only knew how to walk away. You realized that your absence wasn't a punishment for them, it was a calling for yourself, an invitation to your own rebirth. That's what forgetting truly means. Not erasing the past, not pretending nothing happened. It's looking back and feeling no weight. It's remembering and not wanting to return. It's no longer missing the pain, nor holding on to what no longer serves you. It's the silent freedom to move on. Absence becomes a symbol of rebirth when you stop trying to prove something to someone, when the center of your decisions shifts, when you stop living to be seen and start living to feel whole. No audience, no emotional testers, just you at your own pace. That's when silence changes meaning. It's no longer a shield, it becomes fertile ground, a space where you rebuild your priorities, your habits, your self-worth. The one who left you waiting and is now the one searching for you. And you, ironically, no longer wait for anything, just peace. And peace, my friend, is revolutionary. It makes certain presences unnecessary. It turns unread messages into just that, unread messages. No drama, no overthinking, no crisis. You simply move on. The ones who left you hanging never imagined you'd use that silence to grow. They thought they were punishing you with their absence. But it was in that silence that you became stronger, that you listened to yourself, that you realized the world doesn't end when someone walks away. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is not opening the door when they knock again. Because it's not about revenge, it's not about pride, it's about understanding that some returns just aren't worth the path. That what broke you yesterday doesn't deserve a place in your today. And when they realize they can no longer reach you, a discomfort sets in. They talk about you, observe you from a distance, test your reaction. But you're calm. You don't respond with anger or explanations. You're simply not there anymore, not inside, not outside. That's real forgetting, not erasing, but transcending. Not denying, but no longer caring. A new cycle where your presence has become selective, and more than that, sacred, because those who truly find themselves learn never to hand themselves over so easily again. Being cold doesn't mean being cruel. It means having boundaries. It means that after giving so much, you've learned to hold back, to keep your distance from those who mistake your affection for permission to hurt you. This coldness doesn't come from disdain. It comes from exhaustion, from everything you've felt and endured in silence. Strategic coldness is the maturity of someone who no longer begs to be treated with dignity. It's that moment you understand you don't need to yell, explain, or convince anyone of your worth. You simply walk away, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. And for someone used to manipulating you, that is devastating. Because manipulation requires reaction. It needs you to cry, shout, beg, stay. It depends on you responding emotionally. But when all you offer is calm coldness, the game falls apart. Manipulators are masters of drama, of pretending to feel sorry, of disappearing and coming back, of testing your patience. But they can't handle silence. They can't handle emotional absence. They can't deal with the look that no longer softens, because they feed on your empathy. And now, you've taken that away. Coldness is the response of someone tired of being invaded. Someone who's learned that not everyone deserves emotional access. That silence protects more than 1,000 arguments ever could. And being firm doesn't mean you've lost your heart. It means you've placed it where it belongs, inside your chest, not in someone else's hands. Have you noticed how certain people change their tone once they realize you don't react anymore? When your emotional absence forces them to reevaluate their behavior, they pull back, they test harder. But deep down, they've already felt the impact of your distance. This coldness, often mistaken for harshness, is actually a form of self-love, a shield against those who use your emotions as leverage. You no longer need to prove you care. Your silence says everything. And what it says is clear. You no longer have power over me. Stoicism teaches that self-control doesn't mean suppressing emotions. It means deciding where they belong. When you choose silence as a response, you're saying to the manipulator, this space is no longer yours. And to them, that's a blow, a clean cut, an ending. Coldness isn't lack of feeling, it's lack of reaction. It's the maturity of someone who understands not every battle deserves their energy. Some people don't want to resolve things, they want to provoke. And you no longer play that role. You observe, understand, and move on. That posture is unsettling, because it's unpredictable, because it gives no openings, because it shows you've changed. And those who used to manipulate you now try to decode you, but they can't, because what was once accessible is now a mystery, and mysteries don't surrender. This is true emotional control, the ability to stay whole while everything tries to shatter you, to keep your voice low while they provoke loudly, to look without desperation, to walk away without guilt, to continue and without having to explain yourself. This is strategic coldness. This is silent power. There comes a moment when silence stops being a response and becomes a new beginning. There's no announcement, no applause, no one sees it from the outside, but inside something is reborn. A new peace, a quiet strength, a rebirth that happens in the dark, far from the eyes that once wounded you. You begin to live differently. The days take on new colors. What once shook you now teaches you. What used to paralyze you now moves you forward. Because you've learned the rarest art. The art of rebuilding in silence, no audience, no explanation, just being and allowing yourself to bloom. Pain no longer sits at the center. It's still there, yes, but it no longer rules, because now you're the one in charge. And there's no more liberating feeling than looking at everything that once broke you and realizing It doesn't define you. It was just the ground where your new self took root. The constant psychological game loses its meaning. You no longer respond to provocations. You no longer try to prove you're worthy, because now you know. You know your value, you know what you want, and most of all, you know what you'll never accept again. That's maturity. That's silent reconstruction. If you once begged for peace, now you are peace. Not because everything around you is resolved, but because something inside you has aligned. Because the silence that once hurt now soothes. Because the absence that once wounded you is now the foundation of your balance. This is what true rebirth looks like, the kind that happens without anyone noticing. It doesn't need validation, applause, or acceptance. You no longer need to be understood, you just need to be faithful to yourself. And that, on its own, is the greatest victory. Those who see you now don't understand. How is it possible? They wonder. So calm, so different. That's because they didn't witness what you went through. They weren't there for the silent nights, the inner conflicts, the decisions made with no audience. The one who was reborn was you. Only you know what it cost, and maybe that's the beauty of your journey. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You chose the quiet path, but the most powerful one. Because someone who is reborn like that no longer needs to prove anything. Their existence becomes the answer. Their peace, a cry of freedom. Now, when they look at you, they don't see the one they left behind. There's no longer room for old manipulations, outdated dynamics, emotional games. You've transcended. You move differently now. And those who once tried to control you no longer know where to find you. You won without a stage, without speeches, without revenge. You won in silence, through self-care, through invisible reconstruction that little by little made a new life blossom. A life where respect isn't asked for, it's demanded by your presence. Where presence is your greatest weapon. If this rebirth reflects your story, write a single word in the comments that captures everything you've lived through so far. Reborn. Because you didn't just survive, you reinvented yourself. And that, no one can take from you. In the end, what destroys those who betrayed you isn't your scream. It's your silence. It's not your rage. It's your absence. It's not what you said. It's what you will never say again. Because when you go silent with intention, when you withdraw with strategic coldness, something inside them begins to crumble, and it doesn't stop. They were expecting anger, drama, for you to beg, but you vanished. And in your place there was a void, an echo that screams louder than any reply. And the more time passes, the more they realize, you're not just distant, you're unreachable. And that's where everything changes. Because while they wrestle with pride, pretending nothing happened, you rebuild yourself. In silence, in peace, in strength. And when they come back looking for the version of you who once accepted crumbs, they realize she no longer exists. What exists now is selective presence, emotional control, and restored dignity. And what hurts them most is that you won without raising your voice. You won without striking back. You won without touching anything, simply by no longer allowing yourself to be touched. You became what they feared the most, a final absence, a silence that won't break, an end that doesn't return. Now here's the real question. Are you really going to keep explaining yourself to someone who only listens when you scream? Are you still going to justify yourself to those who only understand when you walk away? Or are you finally going to learn how to become unforgettable for what you no longer say? This isn't about punishment, it's about evolution, about no longer being an emotional puppet, about stepping off the stage of someone else's drama, about becoming something no one expects, untouchable, unpredictable, unshakable. And if this video spoke to you, then you already know. The time has come to stop chasing, to use silence as your response and absence as the most powerful presence you can embody. Now write in the comments one word that carries everything you've built up to this moment: unshakable. That word isn't just a state, it's a decision. The decision of someone who rebuilt themselves in silence and now accepts nothing less than what they truly deserve. And if you want to continue this journey with us, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Because here every week you'll learn how to turn pain into power, silence into strategy, and absence into respect. Because those who learn to go quiet at the right time never go back to begging for attention.